Hello everyone, my name is Stephanie Ortega, and as you can see, the title of my presentation is Adult Survivors, Effects of Abuse and What to Do. The overview of my presentation looks like this. I will first discuss the different types of abuse, then the after effects of abuse, the ways these survivors can change those behaviors and things they can do, and lastly, I will mention a couple of resources around the area that the adult survivors can go to for support. Children are abused in many different ways. They can be physically abused, which is when they are hit, pushed, whipped, bitten, punched, slapped, or burned, and their injuries are either visible or internal. They can also be sexually abused, and that's when they are forced, tricked, threatened, or coerced to have any kind of sexual contact with a family member or strangers. Sexual abuse also counts for showing a children pornographic pictures or films, telling them explicit sexual stories, or touching them inappropriately. Another form of abuse is neglect, and that's when the parents do not provide the basic necessities for a child, such as food, clothing, and shelter, when they leave the child alone in dangerous situations, or when they leave them alone when the child can't yet take care of themselves. Also, children are emotionally neglected, and that's when the parents do not take interest in the child and they're just emotional, unavailable for them. They don't hug the child, they don't kiss the child, they don't hold them, and although that's not physically harming the child, it does leave a lot of consequences. Well, it does create serious consequences for the child. Another form is mental suffering, which is psychologically abusing the child, such as name calling or belittling the child. And that's when you just don't make the child feel accepted. And ways we can see this is when you call the child names they don't like to be called, maybe like such as fatty, loser, a failure, just things like that, etc. Lastly, the last two different types of abuse that we're going to be looking at are cruel and unusual punishments and corporal punishments. Cruel and unusual punishments are extreme and inappropriate punishments that are inappropriate for the child's age and ability to understand. That's when, for example, if the child misbehaves and the parent can get very angry and they force them to be locked in the closet as a form of punishment. And that's very extreme. Also, corporal punishments are when the parents use excessive physical discipline, which is very similar to physical abuse because these type of punishments, such as excessively spanking the child or whipping the child for misbehaving or doing something that the parent does not like, and it can cause parents to hit the child in vulnerable areas such as their head, their face, their back, their stomach, and all these places. Hitting the child in all these places can result in visible injuries, which is why I mentioned that it's very similar to physical abuse. And something we must keep in mind is that all forms of abuse are serious and affect the child, and all these types of abuse can affect the child in many different ways, and it's something that we're going to be looking at in the next few slides. We will now be talking about the after effects of abuse in adult survivors in the next couple of slides. Many of them have problems trusting themselves or others, which in turn can affect their ability to have intimate relationships or fit in around their communities or society. They also have difficulties building a strong self-esteem, believing that they can achieve, and protecting themselves in a healthy way. Okay, so individuals who have been abused and neglected have difficulty trusting their own reactions, their thoughts, the feelings, and perceptions. The way we can see this in children is, for example, if the child is hungry, right? So let's say that that child does not yet know how to ask for food, so they cry. And the parent later realizes that the child is hungry, so they feed the child, right? The parent feeds the child. So the child is like, oh, okay, every time I cry, if I cry, I will get fed. I will meet my need of food. So the child continues to do this until one day, or the child is hit for doing that. And if it happens one time, they may feel a little confused. But let's say it continues to happen, the child is going to be very confused. They're not going to know why that is happening, because the times they did that before, it helped them meet their need of being fed, but now they're being beat for it. So it just makes them not trust their reactions and their feelings, and it makes them not trust their parent, because they don't know if their parent is going to help them meet their need, or if the parent is going to beat them. And this also, like, as the child grows up into adult, not knowing how to trust that themselves, or not being able to trust others, plays a major role in their ability to build relationships with others, their self-esteem, and their ability to fit in. And as we talk about fitting in, there's people react in two different ways. They don't know how to balance out um, building relationships with people, and they don't know how to talk to people. So some of them isolate themselves, because that's the way they think they can protect themselves. If they have no contact with others, they don't want to be hurt, so they isolate themselves, and it just results in loneliness, and many times loneliness results in depression. And there's others that are desperate to be liked, so anytime there's someone that is friendly towards them, or that shows an interest in talking to them, they get easily attached to that one person. And it can be very overwhelming for that one individual, because if the other person does not react the way they want them to, it's just going to be very hurtful and very painful for that one person. It's going to devastate them. So it's just very difficult for these individuals to find a balance between being completely becoming isolated, or getting attached to other people. They don't know how to talk to others. They may feel that um they're not liked by anyone, or they just don't know how to interact with others. So it's just these are just some of the first two ways that abuse affects these individuals. Individuals who have been abused have little experience loving or being loved. Thus, their perceptions of love are distorted. Many grow up believing that abuse is a form of love, so they think to themselves that if someone hits them, it is because they love them. Since many of these individuals have never been touched, held, or nurtured the right ways, they do not know how to respond to a touch that does not hurt them. Thus, many of them avoid relationships out of fear and discomfort. It is just difficult for them to trust others when anything in a relationship can trigger bad memories of their past. Um, because of that, they just avoid entering relationships. But there are some that just enter into another cycle of abusive relationships, because that is their perception of how relationships work. That's all they know. So they go back into that cycle of abuse. Building relationships or breaking the habit of entering into abusive relationships can be very difficult for an individual to do and into that cycle, but it is possible by taking small steps. As for self esteem, some individuals with a history of abuse view themselves as worthless, crazy, or bad people who are unworthy and unlovable. A thought that commonly crosses their mind is, if my own parents thought I was no good, how can anyone else think differently? Or I am not even worth it. I don't know what they see in me. But to build self esteem, it would be very good to analyze those cognitive distortions that are in our mind, and point out the strengths that that individual has. It can be difficult at first for them to point out strengths in themselves, but it is possible and doable with time. Also, they may have difficulties achieving success and being satisfied because they feel pressured to outperform everybody else. They believe that they need to work hard because they do not think that they are good enough like everyone else. Or they some people feel like they cannot accomplish anything, that they are not able to do anything, so they don't take any chances because that's their way of staying safe. For them, they see taking chances and achieving as danger, so they just do not take that chance. And talking about protection and staying safe, many survivors of abuse protect themselves by turning off their pain or by being seen but not being heard, which is when they only speak when they have to or when they're spoken to, and they do not make eye contact with this other person. As children, these forms of protection served as survival skills for them. They were survival skills for them, and they still think of them that way. But as they become adults, they create distance between them and others, and they only make them feel bad. So it's important that they learn new methods and new ways for them to self protect themselves, and in a healthy way, in a way that won't distance themselves from anyone. And it's also important that they learn how to detect real danger rather than having reflex reactions for protection from everyone. It's just very important for them um to just learn how to protect themselves, but in a healthy way that will help them trust others, that will help them fit in, and build relationships, or with friends or intimate relationships that help them take out chances to achieve things that they want, like to achieve their goals. And yeah, it's just very important for them to find those methods and be able to detect the real danger from just any potential danger. As children grow up and they start accepting that they were survivors of abuse, and as they um, just think about all the effects that the abuse they went through had of them, they can react very differently. There's some that feel angry or fear, shame, relief, and they can also experience all of these. It's just always different for everybody. And one common thing for them all to feel at first is anger, because as they process what happened to them, they can feel betrayed by that individual, they feel violated, they can feel that they were treated unjustly, and they can have all these thoughts such as, why did this happen to me, why it hurt me. And it is right, it's like it's okay for them to feel that angry. It is a proper response for the things that they went through, but it's not okay if they just bottle up all that anger inside and they don't know how to work through that anger in a proper way, in a healthy way. So it is important for them to find a quick answer to why they are feeling the way they're feeling, and try to get control over the situation when they're feeling angry. Many of them feel fear, or they react with fear as they accept that they were abused, because they feel unsafe and fearful all over again. And just as they have to think back of their traumatic experiences, it can be very fearful for them just to face it all over again. And many of them feel shame as and embarrassed as they have to share what happened to them with others, because many keep it hidden. They don't want others to know, like even their own family members, they just don't want them to know because of that shame that they carry. But it is proper and helpful to help them understand that and accept that they are not the person to blame for what happened. It was not their fault. And just helping them realize that it wasn't their fault and that they shouldn't blame themselves for what happened, or they shouldn't feel unworthy for what happened to them. It can help them feel less embarrassed, and it can help them share what happened to them to those around them. And in turn, as they start accepting this and as they start learning how to react to what they're feeling and how to just understand what happened to them, it can make them feel so relieved as they accept the truth and as they talk about their past with other people. It can help them bring that deep sense of relief as to, like, they're just like, wow, I finally just let it all go. I finally shared it to someone else. And it's very helpful because that person can help them find that support, be that just emotional support for them, and help them cope with everything that happened to them, as if they want to start the process of getting healed from all that pain of the traumatic experiences that they had. But just like I previously mentioned, they all react differently because they were all affected differently by the abuse that they went through, just as they saw, as in lack of trust, difficulty building relationships, difficulties building that self-esteem. And it's just so hard for them sometimes to accept that it happened to them because of that. And once they do that, they can react very differently. Before I continue on to the next slides, I would like to share with you all a very interesting thing I read from an article by Kathleen Kendall Tackett on the topic of child abuse, which was reactions to past abuse vary from person to person. The experiences of some survivors are relatively mild, while others experience severe reactions. And I know I continue continue to say this and mention this, but it is very important to know that children or teenagers or adults who have been abused at any point of their lives will not react the same way. They all react very differently, just like this quote, like this person mentions. It's just very different for every person. It's important for us to understand that just because one child is very open about what happened to them in the past or what continues to happen to them, doesn't mean that every child or every person will be that same way. Just like what I've mentioned before, every person is affected differently, and thus it makes them react very differently to just what they experience. So it's just something that I want you all to keep in mind, that everyone will react differently. Okay, now that we've looked at the after effects child abuse has on survivors who are now adults, and then we've talked about the different ways these individuals can react as they accept that they are survivors of abuse, we will go over steps they can do to help them cope. This information can be helpful for both the survivors themselves or for those that know anyone that has been or continues to be a victim of abuse. One of the first things one wants to do, either being a survivor themselves or someone interested in helping a survivor of abuse that they know, is to process the experience or help someone process their experience of abuse. They can do this by seeking individual or group therapy, and they should find someone that they like, has rapport, and has experience treating past abuse. Therapy can help with cognitive distortions that could be influencing the individual. They can also try journaling about traumatic experiences, and it helps them just put their experiences and what they're feeling in paper. And it has also this method has actually resulted in a major improvement in the individual. So just motivating the person to process their experience either by going to a therapist or journaling would be very helpful for that individual. Also, getting support from others that have gone through similar experiences can be helpful because they'll have people in their life that can understand them and give them that space that they need to heal. Not only that, but they also need the support of their family members or people that they're romantically involved in. So if you yourself are someone who has who is a survivor of abuse, I would highly recommend finding those people that you can just connect with on that level and that can understand you to offer that support. Or also if you know someone, just be that support for them because they really need support in their lives to be able to cope with this, with their past traumatic experiences. Also, another important thing to do is to set some boundaries because while they were abused in the past as children, all those boundaries were violated. So it's important for them to just to understand that they need to learn which people to give their time to and to spend their energy on, because not all individuals are worth of that. So it's very important to help them set those boundaries and just learn how to be around with others and not to spend so much of themselves on them, because it can be difficult, like not for them to say no. So helping them to say no will be very helpful for these individuals. Also, another very important thing is to help them visualize their capacity of wellness. If just like I mentioned, if you yourself are a survivor of abuse and you still cannot cope with those feelings, or you still have trouble getting past all those traumatic experiences, I would highly recommend to visualize the capacity for wellness. There is hope for you, and your experiences can be turned into strengths. And also, if you know some people, like if anyone that you know is a survivor themselves, I recommend you to really help them visualize that capacity for wellness, to always help them understand that there is hope for them and they can survive through this, because that's important. They have to be able to paint that mental picture and to help them push themselves and to help them motivate themselves so they can achieve the goal that they want, for them to be that person that they've always wanted to be, and just for them to feel great about themselves once again. So once again, to process their experience, to get support, to set some boundaries, and to visualize their capacity of wellness are highly important.
Okay, we're going to be going over a couple of services or resources that an individual themselves, a survivor themselves, can go to, or anyone if anyone else is interested in just helping and encouraging a friend or loved one attend a service. I hope these services around the area of El Paso, or that are we're going to go over one that's online or over the phone, will be helpful. There are plenty of services out there willing to help people that were victims of abuse. They're just, and many of them are free and totally confidential. Just in case, just in case you didn't know, now you guys know, there's plenty of resources, plenty of people just willing and looking forward to help individuals who have been survivors of abuse. And one of them is the CASFB, the Center Against Sexual and Family Violence, which is in 580 Giles, El Paso, Texas. And you can call the coordinator at 915-593-1000. And this agency helps victims and survivors ages 14 and up, whether it may be a few days after the abuse or years after. And some of their services are crisis intervention, support groups, therapy, and even immigration services, and they work with the individual themselves or the family together. So it's just totally up to the person or totally up to you whether you want individual help or you want help. You're looking forward to help with all the family, just to understand and to work together. The other is RAINN, which is National Sexual Assault Hotline, and it's free and totally confidential, and it's a 24/7 service. So it's every hour, all day, every day service. If you ever just need to call someone, and if it feels better, and if you feel just better talking to someone over the phone, you can go ahead and call the hotline at HOPE, which is 800-656-HOPE. Or you can go online, which is online.rainn.org or rainn.org/ES. And they help survivors by using a trauma-informed approach. And they help survivors with any stage of recovery, as well as their family, if they are interested in just going through this with that individual. They help both of them. And this will be a great just a great service or resource that you guys can call or keep in mind of if you ever meet someone that is a survivor and is looking for a service. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Well, just before we finish this presentation, I would like to leave you all with this part of an article that I read, and I found very just very insightful and helpful, which is even when the experience was severe, however, there is hope for healing. Life can be good. You can indeed become strong in the broken places. So